Hello, I'm Janet Gregory and welcome to my COVID home in Canada's Rocky Mountains. I'm excited to be presenting my keynote on what's testing got to do with quality. Testing is definitely part of quality, but it's not the whole solution. So please join me as I share my ideas about testing and quality, and hopefully you'll be able to take some concrete ideas back to your team to discuss and try. See you there.
Welcome to What's Testing Got to Do with Quality. I want to start off telling you a little bit about me just to let you know where I started getting interested in this subject. I started off as a programmer. I did that for about 6 years. I was fortunate enough that I worked for a company who truly believed in quality and testing, and they expected me as a programmer to do all my own testing. But my next job wasn't quite the same definition of quality that I had been used to. I was promoted to a QA manager. It was a waterfall kind of project, but more chaotic. But then I changed jobs, and I became a tester on an agile team. Still talking about quality, but I'm testing on an agile team, and it changed the way I viewed software development completely. I started speaking, sharing my experiences, working with teams who wanted to change as well. And then I even wrote 3 books over the last 10 years or so. Co-authored them with Lisa Crispin, and together we started the Agile Testing Fellowship. Now, I developed a lot of skills over that time, but testing and quality have both been near and dear to my heart. I like quotes, and I like to start my talks with quotes. This one is from Edward Deming from 1982. It was part of his 14 key principles for business effectiveness. Those principles are still alive and well and effective in agile teams and organizations. My only issue with this quote, right, is that I find the idea of productivity misunderstood sometimes. So quality is everyone's responsibility. Improve quality, you automatically improve productivity. Depends how you define productivity. The second quote is one of mine. One of the problems I see when teams are transitioning or organizations are transitioning to Agile is they concentrate on the idea of going faster, more speed, right? And they forget about the quality. So my quote, if you focus on quality, the speed will come. And I see this over and over again. If you focus on speed, the quality gets lost. Part of that triangle, right? This talk is based on a 4-part series I recently put out in the form of blog posts. I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between development, which includes software testing, and how we manage the quality of our products. I find that these two things, testing and quality, often get confused. There's a definite relationship, but they are not the same thing. So I'm going to start talking about quality, and then I'll talk a little bit about testing and how I think it supports the quality conversation. The last thing I'll bring in is how we can measure, or how we think we might be able to measure, and how we can change our conversation. So let's start talking about quality. Oh, but that conversation is so hard. How do you start talking about quality? So let's use coffee as an example. If you don't like coffee, think of tea or beer instead. I want you to think about, which one do you like best? Write it down. 1, 2, or 3. Most of the time when I ask this question, there's a split. There's not one preference across all customers. The last time I asked this question, 50% of the people wanted number 1, which is my preference. I like a plain black cup of coffee, especially first thing in the morning. In the afternoon, if I'm going to have coffee, I'll probably go with a cappuccino. But my preference is plain and black. But some people like a lot of foam. Some people really want that pretty design. I asked my sister about her favorite cup of coffee and why she really liked it. So she started talking about it, and she said, well, I go to this little coffee shop around the corner. I go in, they know me, they know my name. They, say same thing, and I'll say yes. And so they make it up. They call me. It's all very nice and warm. I take my coffee. I go sit in my favorite chair. And I sit down with my book and I enjoy my coffee. And so I stopped her at that point and I said, you never really told me about your coffee. Why is that coffee so much better than anywhere else? So then she started to tell me about the amount of milk versus coffee. So her favorite is number 2. That's her coffee. The ratio between them. And she started talking about a few other things about the coffee. Now, I want you to think back about why you chose the cup of coffee you did. Why do you think it's best? Did you actually think about the quality of the coffee? The quality of the coffee at all? Where it came from? How it was picked? The type of beans? How it was roasted? Did you think of any of those sorts of things? Perhaps, but you can't tell that by the cup it's in or by the picture. Now, let's add another dimension, like price. Now, which one? Does the price make a difference? Did you change your mind? What about service? Would that come into it at all? Or a dimension about where it was served? Would that affect the perception of which was better? Maybe I add another one in that says you can get a cup of coffee from the gas station. It'll give you, give it to you in a minute, pay 50 cents, paper cup. Is that a quality cup of coffee? You're probably going to tell me no, but it might be the one you prefer. Let's look at some other perspectives. The most popular definition I hear these days is from Jerry Weinberg. Quality is value to some person. I like it. It's a good definition, but I think it might be too simplistic. Understates some of the dimensions we might want to think about. In the last few years, Alan Page and Brent Jensen have been talking about modern testing principles. And their 5th principle is we believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of our product. Like Jerry's, it's pretty simplistic. The underlying philosophy of all these definitions on this page is the same, right? It's keeping the customer in mind. Consistency, maybe performance, right? Customer satisfaction. Now, think back to the coffee. Which customer are we talking about? Personally, I need something more meaningful so that I can focus on what quality strategy I might want to follow. What should we put together for the product I'm working on? And are we only talking about product quality? So there are different perspectives. In our first book, Lisa Crispin and my first book, Agile Testing, and even in our second, we talk a lot about high quality. but we never really define what we mean. Kind of sad, I know. But again, it's a hard thing to talk about. I also think it can be from many different perspectives. The more research I do, the more I read, the more I think that's the right way to think about. From a customer perspective, which is what we're talking about from the coffee example, right? Fitness for use meets customer satisfaction. That's good. What about from the process perspective? Conformance with the process design, maybe standards, even your specifications. What about the product perspective? Quality might mean the degree of excellence at an acceptable price, right? There's also internal and external viewpoints. Who are the people within our organization, stakeholders that we need to consider? Are there other people we should be thinking about? Do they matter? Now, a few years ago, Isabel Evans introduced me to David Garvin's approaches to quality. He's got 5 approaches. He talks about manufacturing based, that's how we build it. If we're thinking of software development, it's that our development process. Product based, what does that mean from a product perspective? User based, that's our customers, who uses our product. Value based, price, right? We've talked about that a little bit. And then he talks about transcendence. He talks about transcendence in the manner that when you see it, you will know it, and everybody will know it, right? There's some things that you go in and you just say, that's a quality product. Now, I've taken a little bit of a liberty with some of these definitions, and I've put them in these concentric circles, because this is how I think about them. If we don't get the basics down, that manufacturing-based quality, if we don't get that right, how could we ever hope to reach transcendence? And not every company is going to reach that. Not every company is going to want it, right? So our development process, the manufacturing, that's how we build it. So if we take the coffee example, right, it would be how you pick the beans, what beans you use, how you roast them. But when I asked you which was best, that's definitely user-based. What do you like? When we added price, we started to think about the value. If we think about it from an owner's perspective, they care about profits, but how much profit is good enough? How much are they willing to give to the customer experience for that price? So there's give and take all the time. There's also a potential for conflict from these different perspectives, right? Because we have different individuals looking at the quality. Your owner of the coffee shop, for example, might say, you know what, we just don't want to give those fancy things because it takes an extra 30 seconds. That's too much. You have to pay attention to all perspectives. So when you look at when you're building your products, what is your focus, right? Quite a few years ago, I was working in a company, and we were building a trading system, buying and selling and orders and trades, and we sold to different places all around the world, stock exchange systems, right? But one day we got this bug in, and they repeated it again and again, and no matter what we did, we couldn't figure out what the problem was. They kept saying the font was too small. So we would say, we asked you, we gave you the specifications for your screen and the font so that everything, all the orders and everything else could fit on the screen. Do you have that? And they go, yes, exactly like you said. The font is too small. We can't read it. And it went back and forth. We spent so much time trying to figure it out. So finally, one of the support people went there for something else, and we said, please go down to the trading floor and see what's going on. We need to understand what's happening. So when he came back, he said, well, and he kind of went into this story, but what was happening was the traders had no problem seeing their screen. They could see everything. It was exactly as we had laid it out. It was the supervisors who were standing behind them that couldn't see the screen. They wanted bigger font. So we just kind of had this big sigh and we went, all right. So what we did then was we said the specifications we gave were for your traders. If you need your supervisors to see the screen, buy bigger screens, increase the font, closed the bug, right? The supervisor was not one of our customers that we cared about. Should we have? Maybe, but maybe not. But we hadn't even identified them as a person or as a possible customer. So we want to think about people, process, product. What are we looking at? What kinds of quality? What kinds of focus? Right? So people, which customer, which stakeholders, internal customers, external customers. How do we measure satisfaction? Process. Are you meeting standards? Building to specifications. Does it do what it's supposed to do? Are you building it right? From a product perspective, does it sell? Does it meet regulatory standards? Does it make money? If you're trying to make money and keep your company afloat, you probably want to make some money. But there needs to be a balance between the desire of speed, getting that next feature out, with the need for quality. So again, if teams focus on quality, if organizations focus on quality, in all dimensions and perspectives, talk about it. The customers, the people, the process and the product, the speed will come naturally, right? So let's switch things up a bit and move from quality to testing. Testing is about the process, right? Because testing activities are part of the process. But if we think about it a little more, part of testing activities is understanding the risks, and that means looking at the product and understanding the big picture. Many people say that testers have a different mindset from others in the delivery team. I'm not sure if that's true, but we do have a tendency to question everything and look at things with a critical mindset. So is testing about people? Well, maybe it's a bit of all three: people, process, and product. I've looked up a couple of definitions of testing. This first one, right? Taking measurements to check the quality or reliability, especially before putting it into widespread use and practice. Okay, I can kind of live with it. Makes way more sense if I think about it for testing vaccines or something along that line, right? Maybe viruses. If we look at the second one, specifically for software testing, it's talking about the process, a set of processes aimed at investigating, evaluating, and ascertaining. I had to look that word up, by the way, the completeness and quality. So still a little vague, still a little narrow, and we'll look at it a little bit closer as we progress. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is I have actually stopped using the word software testing, or the term, I guess. I have been using the phrase product testing, because these days our products are more than just the software. Very little of our software is only about the software. But let's carry on. So, Testing, according to Janet. So take this with a grain of salt, but this is what I believe. Testing provides feedback. It's feedback in many forms. For example, finding bugs. That's one way of giving feedback. Hidden assumptions. Identifying them, but kind of really looking at them too. Now, a few years ago, we were on vacation in Hawaii. I'd like to be there now, but not happening. And we were there with my daughter and her family. So my grandson, he was about 5, and he was out on the balcony, and he was looking out, and he said, "Daddy, Daddy, come here, come here. Look, the cars are driving on the water." So my son-in-law goes out on the balcony, and he looks, and he said, "No, Braden, the cars aren't driving on the water. They're on a bridge." And my Braden says, "No, they're driving on the water. Really?" And my son-in-law said, "No, they're not driving on the water. They would sink." Trying to be very calm and giving him reasons. And this went back and forth, and they were both starting to get quite angry with each other. And so my granddaughter, who was probably 8 at the time, goes out on the balcony, and she looks and she just shakes her head. She says, "You're both right. You are both wrong." And they kind of look at her, and she said, "Daddy, come squat down here. Come look at it from Braden's perspective." So he squatted down and looked, and my granddaughter said, "See? They're driving on the water." My son-in-law had to admit it looked like they were driving on the water. So then she said, "Now stand up and pick up Braden so he can see what you see and talk about it." So he picked him up, and it was really obvious they were on the bridge. So then they talked about why that was happening. Hidden assumptions, and if we make them and don't clarify them, we will be going in different directions and cause conflict. Testing also gives us information about the state of the product. Yesterday I was listening to a YouTube video about sailing. My husband watches them all the time. He loves it, even though we haven't been sailing for quite a few years. And on Sunday, it's one of his favorites. This one is from a fellow in Denmark who happens to be a programmer and has a Kanban board, which is why I happen to listen to that one as well. But the Sunday that I was listening to, one of the Sundays, he had installed something new, and he wanted to test it. Yay, go programmer. But the documentation didn't show how. So he did some reading. He asked some fellow sailing people, and they all said, "Why are you testing that? Just install it and use it." Well, he wasn't feeling comfortable. He really wasn't feeling comfortable about it. So he figured it out. He learned how to test it. And of course, there was something not quite right. Maybe 1 in 100 times, but it wasn't quite right. Can you imagine what would have happened if the new sailing drive wasn't working when he was out and needed it? So helping identify those risks, helping ask those questions, we can then mitigate some of the risks, product, business, technical risks, right? But if we never have those conversations, if we don't know the state of the products, then we have some other issues. Testing assesses quality, but only if we know how and what that quality means, right? As we tell our testing story, giving information about the state of the product, right? We talk about it, but we need to understand what that means. Now, testing can only give information about what is known. Maybe the risks associated it, but we cannot assure or ensure or what was the word from the last definition, right? We cannot understand what that means. or we cannot actually tell what it is. We can't say we have a quality product because we've assured it. We can't do that. We can only give the information. Now, the Agile testing quadrants and all their variations, it's a model to help us talk about testing activities. And I don't want to go into detail, and I don't even care if you like them, if you've ever seen them. But it's a way to make those testing activities visible. So these are some examples, and they're truly only examples. And we've adapted our model as we've gone through the years. It's changed over the years as well. But the emphasis is on why we test. And we know that every context will be different, which is why these are examples. Right? So the left-hand side is guiding development. Tests that happen before we start coding. That's about preventing defects in the code, about exposing our misunderstandings, about exposing those hidden assumptions. The right-hand side is critiquing the product, right? We're looking at the product, we can hold it, we can touch it, we can feel it, maybe we listen to it, but we're finding defects in the code. The top half is business facing, which just means that the tests are in a format that the business could read and understand. Technology facing means that the test is in more technical language. So the business and the customers may care about the results, but they likely would never go read the tests. I want to talk a bit more about the tests in the lower right-hand quadrant, the technology-facing tests that critique the product. I think these testing activities deserve a special place. They deserve special mention. And when Brian Merrick first started talking about these in 2003, this is what got me the most excited about this model. Because so many of these are overlooked and underappreciated. There are so many quality attributes. This is just a few of them, right? Safety, security, performance, recoverability is much more important with continuous delivery and continuous deployment, right? If you put your product out all over the world, you're going to care about localization. You're going to care about accessibility because it's becoming more and more regulated in how we do that. So there's a lot of different quality attributes that are implicit when our customer buys a product. And we need to make sure we test these. Often the highest risks are our biggest constraints. And so that makes it addressing and testing those even more important. For example, if you have a pacemaker installed, right? Medical devices, they just need to be working 100% of the time. We expect that. So that means that we expect the companies who build them to know it works 100% of the time, or at least 99.9999, right? Another example is data integrity. We carry a lot of data with us. We carry it in our smartphones. We carry it in our credit cards. Some of us trust them more than others, but they're part of what we do these days. We are plugged into the world all around us. The Internet of Things. Right. So, for example, our customers, they trust that Alexa, or whatever form of Alexa, isn't sharing their most private moments to the rest of the world. Or when we use our smartphone to turn up the heat in our house, and I do that a lot, it won't accidentally unlock your front door. We expect safety. Do we test for that? So there's a lot of quality attributes that we don't necessarily consider, but are expected to be included. So we need to talk about them to make sure we test for them. As a delivery team, we need to think about the ethics of our programming, the human consequence, right? Because how we how we build and deliver our code has consequence. If you don't consider these different dimensions of quality, if we still thought about QA as a necessary evil to catch those bugs before we put them into production, in a lot of cases we might be out of business. So we really do need to adjust, we need to adapt, we need to understand our customers' different expectations of quality. And a lot of times that comes down to trust. Do you know if your customer trusts your product? Now, if we talk about testing, it's like, when do we start? A couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post on why I hate the terms shift left, shift right. But when I did that, it was as applied to a linear line, right? We start, we stop. And I think that's a mistake to think about development, because it's not linear. And we shouldn't think about it as that, because there is no start and stop. Instead, try thinking about it as an infinity loop. I first saw this infinity loop in Ellen Gottesdiener's and Mary Gorman's Discover to Deliver book. And then later, the DevOps loops, right? And the last time that came to my attention, it was in Dan Ashby's continuous testing model. We test everywhere, here and here and here, right? Dan's model is the one that inspired this diagram, because we really do test everywhere. So I think about the left-hand side, the left loop, right? That's kind of the development loop where we're actually making things. But the right loop is more about watching and observing what's happening with our customers. And we're constantly going back and forth between the loops. Sometimes we flow slowly, and sometimes it goes very quickly. Slow, fast, right? Depends. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper into this. So there is no start, there is no end in an infinity loop, right? But if we start to think about the idea of an idea, the start of an idea as a beginning, right? So we have this idea, we're going to brainstorm, we're going to discover, we're going to be testing ideas and planning, right? So that's where we get the shared understanding. This is where we're going to start talking about quality. This is testing early in the cycle. This is about preventing defects in the code, about getting a shared understanding of what and why we are building something. We get to have those quality discussions, understand what attributes we need to consider as constraints as we build. We will discover, test ideas, highlight those hidden assumptions, and decide what we're going to do about it. We may even have user experience testing with real customers, right? So we can start to ask questions. We can ask lots of them. We can base them on the quality attributes we've defined. Do we need to think about diversity, about who is using our product? Because that can make a huge difference. Quite often, we build in limitations without even realizing it. So ask those questions, because that's how we build quality into our product. As long as we are building the right thing and understand the problem space, we have a better chance of getting it right. These are those quadrant 2, the top left-hand tests that we were talking about. Now, testing activities during development. So this is the bottom half of that left loop. During your iteration or your story development, this is when we do these kinds of testing activities. And not all people, and I understand that, think of them as testing activities, but in my opinion, they are. Most of these activities are about process quality. How well are we performing? They help us to be confident in that we're not going to introduce any code level bugs, right? And really only 2 of these activities address product quality. For example, If we're using personas in our exploratory testing, thinking about the end user, maybe we're thinking about the product as a whole. Maybe we identify a bunch of different kinds of personas and really think about the limitations on these. User acceptance testing, getting real users in as early as possible to give us feedback. Right? This is one way to start addressing product quality. Is it meeting the needs of the end user, not necessarily the process? The process or the testing of the process, this is all good, right? It's how we build it, but we do need both. Now the right-hand side is about the deployment pipeline, being able to deploy quickly. It's about getting fast feedback and regular feedback, watching customer actions, reactions, right? Monitoring events, observing, analyzing them, learning, and then feeding it back into the left side of the loop for our next new idea, for our next new adaptation. It's a continuous loop. But the more we have real customers, the more we understand how they're using it, the better our product will become. So those testing activities, they have feedback loops, and we really want to be thinking about how fast they are. Can we adjust and adapt? It gives us information to help assess the quality, but how can we assess if we don't know how to measure? So let's talk about a little bit about measuring. Testing efforts and product quality. They're both hard questions. How do we measure? So let's talk about measurements in general for a little bit, because measuring quality is not easy. I get asked lots of questions about it, but we can all agree, right, on what a measure means. In general, high quality, good. Low quality, bad, right? I think everybody can agree on that. But I'm going to ask you a question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the conference so far? Give you a second to think about that. Okay. So you could put it in the chat, and as I'm watching this, I'll kind of see. But I'm guessing some of you might say 1s. Some of you might say 5s. I'm guessing the organizers all hope whatever you say means really good. I had somebody tell me yesterday that they got their evaluation back from a conference talk. They got 1.5. My first thought when I read that was, whoa, because I had been mentoring her for this particular talk. And I went, whoa, that's not very good. And then as I kept reading, she said, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being good, the best. And it totally flipped my concept about what that number meant. So some of you are going to say 1 and say this is a really good conference, but some of you are going to say 5 and mean it's a really good conference. Now, I showed you on the last slide that red to green, with green on the right side, so I'm going to guess most of you thought 5 was good. But the reality is we are not consistent. For example, think the coffee example, right? But sometimes this inconsistency can give us an issue. Some of you may recognize this picture, but some of you might not. This was San Francisco this summer. They had a tremendous amount of fires. So the sky a couple of mornings was looking like this, quite eerie. But it was the same scene up and down the whole coast. Now when we measure air quality, it's a little backwards, at least to me, right? And I check air quality a lot because I have lung issues, so I need to make sure it's okay before I go somewhere. Well, anyhow, this top chart, right? This is how the world measures air quality most of the time. Green is good, or blue kind of thing, depending. And the red, the dark red, the maroon is bad. But the numbers, low numbers are good. High numbers are really bad, right? On the lower scale, the one with the blue in the number 1, this scale is how we measure it in the province that I live in. So 1 to 10, it's a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is really good quality, 10 is bad. But it's got this other little maroon thing that has a little plus sign in. You can't actually see the plus. And that confuses me, because a couple of years ago we had forest fires in our area. And one morning I got up and it said the air quality was a 79. 79. What does that mean? Right? So 1 to 10 on the scale is an 11 much different than a 79? Does it go any higher than 79 because it looked really bad outside? I had no idea what the scale was between 11 and 79. It made no sense. Now, I'm not going to talk about air quality anymore, but the important thing to get out of this example is the way we define quality in our products may not be the same way people use the word normally. So pay attention to the message you're giving. So I would like you, and as I'm watching this with you, I'd like to see some ideas about what you measure. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. And so just kind of type in the chat now. What do you measure? I'm going to see the list in a bit. So I'm just going to wait here. And I'm hoping some of you actually do type in the chat. In the meantime, this is a list that I often get, right? Cycle time, number of bugs, severity, our build radiator is green, right? Rework rates. Some of these are good. Numbers of bugs or severity of bugs, I'm not a fan of that so much because it really doesn't tell me how good the quality is. Might tell me how bad it is. And most of these don't tell me how good the product of the quality is, or how the product quality is. It tells me all about the process quality, right? How much rework are we actually understanding? That might begin to talk a little bit about product quality, but test coverage doesn't tell me anything. Neither does the number of automated tests tell me anything about the products, right? So I recommend looking at the State of DevOps or the book Accelerate. They have some good measures for product quality, or for process quality, sorry, my mistake, but not so much on product quality. The one thing I want to talk about measures as well is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Now, the example I use quite often is unit tests. I was working with I've worked with quite a few teams that measure unit tests, and in a couple of those, one specifically that I remember is the developers themselves said, you know what, we want 80% test coverage with our unit tests. Sounds great, but what started happening was for them to reach that, they started just putting in tests. Not necessarily good tests, and in fact some of the tests would just say assert true, which didn't test anything, but it got their levels up. So be careful about that. Isabel Evans showed me this graph. Well, she was presented it at a conference, and she showed what it is two different products. So showing the different attributes, right, on two different products. It was essentially the same functional features. It was on accessibility, how they, it was targeting people who had disabilities, right? But the two products were aimed at completely different users. One set did not care about speed. They were scared of making mistakes, weren't tech savvy. The other group valued being able to complete their tasks very quickly and wanted the flexibility. So when they started measuring these attributes, it showed how different the products were. It wasn't about price point, but an attribute difference, right? The quality attributes were quite a bit different. They were competitors, but not really, because they had completely different customer base. So they were using user-based quality metrics, value-based customer metrics, but for individual personas. They were both providing value to the customer they were targeting, right? So even thinking back to our coffee example, who are you targeting? So I'm going to ask you, do you know where your product stands? Do you know whether your customers value your product? Or are you with the utility company that no matter what you do, the consumers will likely stick it out? Not many of us can say that. And there is no one right answer. But I ask you, please don't take the easy way out. Have the quality conversation with your team, with your stakeholders, with your customers. Now, I got this idea from Margaret Deneen, and what she suggests, and in my resources at the end, I have her blog post for you to read, but start the quality conversation based on quality attributes, or perhaps risks, right? List them, ask people, right? In this example, highest priority is a 1, lowest priority is a 10. So I'm going to rate them. I think reliability for this particular product isn't very essential, but I think performance really is. And once you get everybody's input, then you can start having a really good conversation. That's what you want to start with, right? Make sure people know the range. That's important too. So let's wrap this talk up. As a collaborative, high-performing team, everyone must be able to put the customer expectations as the foundation of their work. It's not enough to make sure the product works, but it needs to satisfy the needs of the customer as well, whoever that customer might be, whoever the stakeholder is. If your teams are not talking about quality first, you have an opportunity to start that conversation. Otherwise, how will you ever know and be able to judge what testing needs to be done? How will you know what risks you have to consider? Quality really is everybody's responsibility, and that means testing activities belong to everyone, right? Good testing supports good quality. It doesn't mean that good testing assures good quality, right? Because you can point out the defects, example, tree in the road, but if the defect is chosen not to be fixed and you get a workaround, well, it comes down to I tested, I reported. But please don't be that team that paints around the tree, because that doesn't leave a good quality product. Process quality helps, but it doesn't automatically make a good product with a high quality. I heard this quote a while ago, and I promptly forgot who said it or where it was, so I apologize. But the nature of quality is complex and diverse. Awesome quote. I want to follow it up with, understand what you mean when you say quality. So have that quality conversation. So wrapping it up, Please email me, send me a Twitter message, however you want to. I will love to answer your questions. And this is the references that I used, and so I'll be putting this slide deck up, I think. If not, you can always just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. So now I'll stop and we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. I see you then.